Now, no matter where he ends up next season, whether it's back in Seattle, one of the other 31 teams, is this the best cornerback of his generation?
Oh. That's a tough question because you got Richard Sherman, of course, holding it down in the Pacific Northwest. You got Patrick Peterson, who's always in the conversation. And then, of course, Del Rivas. So you look at those three guys, three different types. Patrick Peterson is the athletic type. You know, he's the one that can do everything, play offense, defense, catch the ball, punt return. Then you look at Del Rivas, you know, very cerebral. Not as tall as Richard Sherman, not as aggressive at the line of scrimmage, but can jump on every route because of his high IQ. Richard Sherman, though, lengthy. He gets the knock because he plays on the side of the field, and he said so many times over and over, I can't help the system I'm in. But him at the line of scrimmage, him disrupting wide receivers, and his ability to be right next to the wide receiver while the quarterback is making a read and making it seem as if the wideout isn't open, which is why they never throw at him, that's one of the best, not just of his era, but of all times. And that's the reason why he doesn't get thrown at a ton, because a quarterback's going to look Richard Sherman's way, but he always sees Richard Sherman's within an arm length, either grabbing or pushing a wide receiver. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I'm going to have to say yes. When you look at the interceptions since he got in the league,
32 more than anybody.
In the PBUs and the pass breakups. That's a stat that people don't really appreciate because they oftentimes want to see guys pick it off and take it to the house. But pass breakups are just as important, and you rarely have that footage of Richard Sherman getting beat completely bad over and over again. And some of these other great DBs, you'll have that occasionally on the footage.
I didn't play in the sport. I certainly didn't play wide receiver. You know, it's always this debate of, like, is Deion the greatest of all time?
Yeah.
And you'll hear some people, Redskins fans, say Darryl Green was better than Deion when they played at the same time. Like, well, he's not the best of all time. Darryl Green was better. So you're never going to win every argument with this. But I will say this. The story of Richard Sherman, to me, is better than any of these guys. And the production for where he was drafted, obviously a fifth-round pick, comes out of Stanford, wasn't considered one of these top guys, goes on to have the most interceptions during his career. And he was a cultural icon in that he brought a different flavor to football, and he did it when he was taunting Tom Brady. He did it when he was taunting Michael Crabtree. He did it when he was speaking with Aaron Andrews, and then he turned that into, wait a second, all eyes on me. I'm going to be the best corner in football in the next few years, was an all-pro. I am saying, as much as we love Rivas, and Rivas gets all this love and is credited to Rivas Island, Richard Sherman, to me, is if I had to think about that generation, who was the corner, Legion of Boom, Richard Sherman leading the way, and with all the antics that he had and with all the great comments that he had, with all the great play, I'm going with Sherman, best of his generation.
Every time this comes up, people on Twitter and on the radio, they like to say he doesn't follow the receiver backs. That's filled a million segments. I'm not talking about that. I want to talk about one moment where I think is the best I've ever seen, at least of this generation. Week 1 of 2014, they're at home. The Packers are in town. Aaron Rodgers is there. They didn't go to Sherman's side at all. And I'm talking Rodgers, who is as fearless as they come. Rivas was visibly bored during the game. Sherman was visibly bored during the game. He approaches Rodgers after the game, as he's prone to do, and says, "You were avoiding me, weren't you?" Like, right in his face. I don't know how Rodgers answered, but visibly watching him, it did look like he was avoiding him. The biggest compliment I can ever give you is Aaron Rodgers, I think is the best player in the league, would not throw over to Sherman's way. He's the best of the generation.
So he has 2 Achilles injuries that he's dealing with, right? He tore his Achilles fully last year, recovering from that. That was back in week 10, I do believe. Then he had a cleanup already this offseason. He's 29 years old. He stays in Seattle. He goes to another one of the 31 teams. What is a team getting in this Richard Sherman now? That, you know, you were mentioning something that seemed to be more cerebral.
Yeah, they're going to get an older, smarter, wiser, more experienced, slower.
What is it about him that makes him better than everybody else up here? I always hear he's the most intelligent corner.
And that's the thing. But the description of who you're going to get is everything I said about his high IQ, but you're also getting a slower, not as fast, not as explosive guy. And that's just the way it is. Even if he wasn't injured at this point, his age, because of wear and tear, he's going to be slower.
Really simple, too, Nate. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
He's 6'3". Yeah. You don't see 6'3" corners.
Presence.
You can't coach that. You can't reach 6'3" at the corner. It's crazy.
Let's be very clear, though. He's not Patrick Peterson to an athletic standpoint where he can be on an island by himself without great help over the top. I'm not saying that Pat doesn't have that. But Richard Sherman is going to have to go somewhere where they have a safety that can go sideline to sideline. There's a reason why Richard Sherman was so aggressive at the line of scrimmage, because he knew, one, I'm smarter than you. I could take this chance. But even if I miss worst case scenario, I got Cam and I got Earl Thomas that can cover my back. That's a luxury. Will he have that same luxury wherever he goes?
Eric Berry.
Yeah,
No.
Kansas City is a very interesting possibility, although they just went down that road with Revis, and it didn't work out great. I will say
This
this,
just reminded me, you mentioned Oakland as a destination. Him and Crabtree, that's something I'd like to see.
a
That's
great
sugar
point.
on
Good
pasta.
That's
right
a great
there.
point. Sugar on pasta, indeed. With Sherman, what's interesting is that he's this 6'3" hawk. Like, we haven't seen, like, these usually 6 foot, this great wingspan. The Saints took a guy named Stanley Jean-Baptiste in the second round a few years ago who was 6'4" and had a flamed out. You know, the Dolphins have a guy who's pretty good, Xavier Howard, big 6'3". It started a different mold of corner that we hadn't seen drafted, and he's the credit for that. I will say this with Sherman. I said it in the opening of the show, and I'll say it again. I don't know how many years he wants to play. The way he speaks, the way he is on Twitter, the way he is with the media, I would not be shocked if they gave him a job in Park Avenue, or if the NFLPA down in D.C. says, hey, why don't you be our next president, or why don't you be our player rep? Why don't you be the guy? Because he speaks about league terms as a whole, and he represents the players in a way that few guys do. Stanford educated, obviously, but also has really gone through a lot in the league and has been as a player. I think he's one of the more interesting characters in the league. League office, Richard Sherman, at some point.
There'll be a fight for him. Richard Sherman,
Oh, yeah.
pretty awesome stuff there. More